I realized coming to speak to you guys that I'm actually speaking on a question of punctuation this morning, because you are servants' church. And where you put that apostrophe makes a huge difference. I am a bit of a sort of stickler, but it matters because you are the church of the servant. Servant apostrophe S. This church is formed by, led by, created by Jesus Christ, the servant king. But if you shifted that apostrophe back, so it was servants apostrophe, this would be a church full of servants. Be a church identified by service of Christ. And I think that is the shift that we make. We so often, those of us who are Christians, shift our identity from those served by Christ to those who serve Christ. We identify as servants. And I certainly did, and I too often do. And I want to just tell you a little about what that does. So a few years back, I was saved when I was 20. About 10 months later, I began working as an intern for a church. And the first weekend I was there was a harvest supper. It was just a kind of social event for the church family. We got together, we had a meal, bringing food like you guys are for lunch, I understand. And there were kind of sketches and funny skits that people did, and it was a good evening. At the end of the evening, some of the guys were putting the staging blocks back in the loft of the church hall. So I just kind of went and lent a hand, and it was good fun, a few of us doing that. And then I went and did the washing up with some others, and it was a nice chance to get to know people. I was new in the church, it was good. And then I set off home at the end of the evening when people were kind of locking up, to walk back to my apartment, and the pastor took me on one side. And he said, "John, I just want to commend you for setting a good example tonight to the young guys. It's great that you're new here and you got stuck in. I saw you clearing up. I saw you washing up. Just wanted to encourage you with that." And I remember walking home across the park thinking, this is great. I had an enjoyable time and I've been commended for it. I basically had fun and the pastor said, "Good job. I'm going to enjoy this. This is going to be a good job." Well, a few years after that, I was assistant pastor at a church in Bolton, and I remember we had 2 services on the Sunday morning. I was walking home up the hill after Sunday, and I thought, I'm free. I'm free. I've done my bit, and the rest of the day is mine. And something had happened in me to turn serving Christ from being a liberating joy to being burdensome slavery. I thought of Jesus as a harsh taskmaster. And I've seen it loads across churches. And it's dangerous. It breaks people. And it skews churches. And it denies Christ. And it's not, as I alluded to earlier, for me, used to do this sin. This is something I wrestle with day by day by day. And the Lord is good, and there is grace, and I get to laugh at myself more than I used to, but this is still a ridiculous sin. It's kind of funny because a few people have said, quite a few people in church say, "Oh, there's a book you should read." Addresses this, and they wave my book at me, and they're right. So I speak as someone who is trying to walk in repentance of this. So how does it come about? How do we end up in this position where we identify ourselves as servants of Christ, where our relationship to Christ is he is a master whom we must serve. He is a harsh taskmaster. How do we end up there? I think there's a number of reasons. We're going to run through them fairly quickly, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up one or two and you think, I need to pray into that. I need to dwell on that. I think that's me. Some of us serve to be good enough for Christ. He's a great Lord, and we want to be good enough. We feel unworthy. We've got a wrong view, if you like, of how we are righteous before God. We think we've got to do it. And we know it's not moral righteousness alone, because we know the Pharisees got it wrong. So we think, but it's service. It's doing the right thing. It's working hard. It's pitching up early to set up. It's being the last to leave because of helping pack down. It's being at all the church meetings, all the groups. It's about then I'm good. Then I know I'm good enough for Jesus. And often you can tell your wrong motives when you flip it. So when it goes wrong, often that's when I find my heart is exposed. And if you're trying to be good enough for Jesus, maybe you go out with mates and you have a bit too much to drink. And so the next day you read a bit more of your Bible in your quiet time. It's almost like I need to kind of make some kind of payback. I need to make myself better because I slipped up. I sinned, so now I've got to do a bit of penance. I've got to make myself righteous again, as if righteousness wasn't a gift we were given in Christ's death on the cross. Maybe it's that you want something from Jesus. It's simple wages. I'll work hard for you, and I want this. I found this out when I realized it was a Friday night a few years back, but it's been repeated, and I was struggling not to completely lose it with my daughters. I was furious, and it was a kind of massive effort of the will not to just yell at them in fury. And the issue was they were trying to do their teeth, and they were being a little bit naughty, as toddlers are. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing particularly bad. They were just tired, and they were dropping toothpaste on the floor and stuff. And I reflected on afterwards, why was I so cross? Why did that pretty run-of-the-mill, being a dadness, make me so angry? And the reason was that I had worked hard all week, and I had a pizza in the fridge, I had a bad film with swords and poor dialogue on the DVD, and Jesus owed me Friday evening off. I'd worked hard for him. He owed me. A couple of hours, Lord, and I'm not getting it because the girls won't go to bed. And I think a lot of us, it's not that we consciously think, if I work hard, Jesus will give me a good job, Jesus will give me a good house. But when you flip it, Lord, my pagan friends have just got promoted. I've got made redundant. I work hard for you. I serve each week at church. I'm a deacon. What's going on? Lord, how come all my sisters are married and I'm not? When they just turn up at church and enjoy it, and I do kids club week after week after week. Lord, you owe me. That's the subtext. We think that Jesus is a pagan God who will only bless us if we make the right offerings, if we kill the goat, if we turn the prayer wheel, whatever it is. But in our case, it's service. And we think, Jesus, I've worked hard, you owe me. I don't know, what does Jesus owe you? Does he owe you a holiday? Does he owe you fame? Does he owe you children? Does he owe you converts? Or maybe you want to pay him back. Maybe you think, well, Jesus is a great God. He's done so much for me. I owe him. I need to pay him back. I need to work hard to pay back some of what I owe him. And the problem with that is when you stop and think about what you owe him, he bore hell on the cross. He suffered the infinite wrath that is due for our sin, the anger of God. How many cups of tea do you need to make to pay back the cross? How many missionaries do you need to pray for to pay back that suffering? We serve Jesus wrongly because we get Jesus wrong. But secondly, and perhaps more powerfully, I think we serve Jesus wrong because we get other people wrong. Whose opinion matters to you? It's in all of us, I think, and it'll vary. Is it, maybe you do something up front in church, you lead worship, you preach, you give a notice about some event in the church life, and it might be you want John to come and say, hey, that was good, well done. slap on the back, good job. Maybe it's the elders, maybe it's your friends. I don't know, but there are 10 people might come up and say, well done, and whatever. But there's someone you want their praise. You want to matter. We want to be well thought of. We want to impress people. I'm a visiting preacher. I want you to think I'm awesome. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But there is I fight it partly by saying it. My church are really bored. Yes, John, we know you're a proud hypocrite. You tell us every week. Come up with another sin. We'll be interested. But it's there. It's in me. It's nasty. And it works in different ways. I've got a friend who we've talked about the battle with pride, and he said he knows that he is awesome. And he finds it surprising when other people don't notice. He genuinely thinks he is probably the best preacher. I mean, Spurgeon might have been close, but he genuinely thinks he is God's gift to the church. And he kind of finds it odd if other people don't agree. And he says that's how pride hits him. This kind of idea that he is superb. But for me, it's different. I want to belong. I'm desperate to belong. I remember we had a head boy when I was at school. He played in the first, I think he was playing the first 15 rugby team and captained the first 11 cricket team or something. He was a straight A-level student. He had a beautiful girlfriend. And he was a really nice guy. You couldn't even hate him because he was warm and caring and friendly and always the kind of guy to look out for someone who's being bullied, that sort of thing. And he got away with it because everyone respected him. And I'm nothing like that. I always remember thinking, I'd love to be like that. I'd love to be kind of to find social situations easy, to be one of the in crowd. And we're like that. We want to belong. We want to matter. Maybe you feel there's a kind of group that are the serious Christians, the ones on the inside of the church, and you kind of want to be part of that group, however you see it. It's hard because it's hard to know what that looks like. But we want to belong. We want someone to tell us we matter, as if being drawn into the Trinity as a child of God wasn't enough of an in-group for us. We add others to it. Or maybe it's just that you're needed. I'm just going to read a couple of verses from Luke 10. Luke 10, verse 38 through 42. So Luke chapter 10, starting at verse 38. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. And you can hear Martha's jaw hit the floor, can't you? And ours do. Jesus, don't read that passage in church. People stop doing things. I wouldn't ask Mary to lead a ministry at church. She just sits around. Martha is the kind of person you want to build your church on, because she'll get things done. If you ask Martha to do something, well, she's doing 100 things, but she'll add it on because she's that kind of person. Mary's just always sitting around praying, reading her Bible. She's not going to achieve much. She's not productive. I kind of think, I do find this a very humbling text as a pastor. How often do I promote a Martha-like spirituality? And I don't want to be too hard on Martha. She's awesome in John 11. But here she gets it wrong. And you can think what's going through her head, but Jesus, you've just turned up at our house with these 12 hangers-on who are useless for anything, they're blokes, and a few others as well, and beds need to be made up. He said, well, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. I'm okay with the ground, Martha. Yeah, but what about food? What about food? We need to feed this lot. Got any loaves? Any fish? It's okay, Martha. I don't need you. You need me. Jesus flips it. Mary's got it right. She's sitting at my feet. She's listening to my teaching. Martha, you have the Lord of hosts in your front room, and you're in the kitchen. And how often are we like that? We have the Lord of hosts among us, and we're more concerned about making sure the cups are washed up, or we're more concerned about making sure our to-do list is ticked off. We end up, it just needs to be done. Just needs to be done. There'll be time for prayer, for Bible later. We don't say there'll be time for the Lord later because we know it's wrong, but he's not on our minds. And I have, for me, a little kind of diagnostic tool for knowing when my service of the Lord has gone wrong. It doesn't necessarily tell me which way it's gone wrong. I do all of these. That's why I came up with them. I just looked at me. And here's my diagnostic tool. If I don't pray by myself about my service, then I'm doing it wrong. I'll pray in front of people. I'm a preacher. It's a bit embarrassing if you forget to pray before you preach. It's kind of the dumb thing. But if I've not prayed by myself, where only the Lord sees, then I'm serving wrongly, because it's not about him. It's somehow about me. That's my little self-diagnostic tool, because I can't set up the chairs to the glory of Christ without a work of the Spirit in me. I can set up chairs, but I can't do it to the glory of Christ, loving him, loving his people, without a work of the Spirit. I need to pray before I set up for church. And if I can't set up the chairs, I certainly can't preach without a work of the Spirit. And this service, this way that we get it wrong, it breaks us. It leads to pride. You see it in the Pharisees. They kept their rules, and you end up standing in the temple going, Lord, thank you that I'm not like that man, a tax collector. And we might not pray it in church. I don't stand up and say, Lord, thank you that I'm not like these guys in the church. But we say it inside. We end up ranking ourselves. I'm better than them. Do you sometimes find that there's a bit of you that likes hearing about someone else's sin because you feel better about yourself? Well, I'm not like that. They're a good Christian, and if they are like that, then I'm okay. We become proud, or we despair. And I think actually this is where it always ends up. We serve Christ to get something from him or to get something from other people, and it can never be enough. Can never be enough. And how many cups of tea do I need to make to repay Christ for the cross? How well do I need to preach for Christ to give me a big church that makes me famous and means that lots of people buy my books and I'm really well known and I get invited to speak at a conference in America? Now that would be where it was at. Yes, Pastor Piper, I think I can make the date. That, whatever it is, but actually, you never get there. You can never earn your own righteousness. You can never make yourself matter if being adopted into God's family doesn't make you matter enough. It's It's weary, it's exhausting. I remember a friend saying to me about their service in their church that they realized, he said, my faith has died under the weight of my service. And I thought, I want to write a book about this because I get that. And I just hear it so much. Our service destroys us. It denies Jesus. It makes Jesus out to be a less great king than he is. Now, of course, Jesus does motivate us to serve him, and we'll come on to this a little bit at the end. But that's not primarily how he relates to us. There's a sense in which, I don't know if you know, there's a story in the Old Testament. Jonathan, the son of Saul, the king, Prince Jonathan, sees the Philistines up in their fortress, and he says to his armor bearer, Let's take them out. Let's take them on. You know, these guys, they're God's enemies. They've invaded Israel. They've insulted the living God. We're going to take the battle to them. And he says, let's go up. And if they say, come on up here, we'll take it as a sign from the Lord that he's given the Philistines into our hands. So Jonathan and his armor bearer, by themselves, attack the Philistine army. And Jonathan takes down 14 of them before the Israelites realize what's happening. And they're so inspired by the leadership of their prince that they charge the Philistine ranks. And the battle is won. And Jesus is like that. He is a king who inspires us to follow him over the top, taking the fight to Satan and taking the gospel to the world. But more than that, he's like David. He's like David, who when the Israelite army was carrying in their boots, picked up 5 stones and a slingshot, and wearing his shepherd's robe, went out to fight the most feared warrior of his age, armed and armored like a tank. And trusting in God alone, he took down Goliath by himself. And the Israelite army cheered and ran after the Philistines as they legged it. Christ wins the victory for us. He said, it's okay, you stay there. I will go and take on sin and death and Satan, and I will obliterate them. And I'll do it not even while you're carrying, I'll do it while you are yet sinners. I will win the battle for you, and I will give you the victory. You will plunder the camp of the enemy, because I have done it all. It is finished. You see, when we make our service essential to the life of the church or the mission of Christ, we rob him of his glory as the servant king, the suffering servant, the one who came to die for his people. And it's also slavery. It becomes a wearying and exhausting slavery for ourselves. We make it about our behavior, our activity, our service, and it's just exhausting. I remember being really struck. I was reading a book by a man called Martin Luther, one of the reformers, a German reformer in the 16th century. And in it, he drew out that anything that doesn't come from faith is sin. So either you live by faith or you sin. And he had examples, and I thought, okay, that means I can stand up here and preach, and it can be sin. Because if I do it because I want you to respect me, not because I want Christ to be glorified among us, then it is sin. Paul says this at the beginning of 1 Corinthians. If I give my 1 Corinthians 13, if I give my body to the flames but have not love, it is but a sounding brass and a clanging cymbal. I can be martyred for Christ, and it can be utterly meaningless if I don't do it for love of him. Or do it out of duty or thinking he needs my sacrifice, then it's not motivated by love. And Paul says it's meaningless. That is quite scary. It means that if I go to a prayer meeting because I want the pastor to be impressed with me, rather than because I want to petition God, then it is sin. And it blew my mind, because I thought sin is about the heart, not the externals. And I would have said that, but I hadn't grasped it. Now, well, this has to change. Then every way I motivate myself and the flock of God entrusted to my care. Because I can't say, come to the prayer meeting, it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but if you come out of duty, not out of faith, then it's not right before God, it's sin. So what do we do? What do we do when we serve Christ wrongly? I think the first thing we need to think about is stopping. Just stop it. And maybe that means stop serving. If our service of Christ is sin, stop. Now, you might not need to, and I'm actually going to give you a better answer in a sec, but if the idea of giving up your service in the church feels impossible to you, then that suggests there's a problem. Because if Jesus needs me to pastor Broadgrace Church, then he is not Lord. He is dependent. If he needs John to pastor Servants Church, he is not Lord. The church was okay before you taught in the Sunday school, before you ran the PA desk, before you played, before you served, before you led a Bible study group, before you cooked meals for friends who were struggling or ill, before you went to visit someone and read the Bible with them, before you prayed for them. Christ was Lord of his church before you did any of those things, and he will be after you finished. He doesn't need you. So we can stop. And I think that we need to be serious about this, because I think that a lot of our ministry is killed by weary service. If you, say, taught a youth group every Thursday evening or whatever, and you just find it exhausting, you get home from work, and week by week by week, one off, of course there'll be times you do, because you had a bad day or whatever, but week by week by week, you don't want to go, you find it hard work, it's tiring, you need to prep, you can't summon the energy, you don't enjoy it, and it just goes on. But you can't stop because there's no one else to do it. There's no one else willing or able to step up, and so you keep going. What will end up being communicated to those young people is that service of Jesus is hard work, and that he will weary you, he will use you. Maybe Jesus would rather have no youth group than a weary one that is built on a lie about him. Do you see? It's like when the JWs knock on your door on a Saturday morning. I always think, even if you were right, which you're not, if I believed you, I realised I'd have to go out every Saturday morning and knock on doors. That's not very attractive. But I think we're sometimes the same. We present a gospel of God's free love, and then we bring in the strings that are attached. Now you're a member of a church, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to be at this group, you need to do... And we bring in the requirements of being a Christian. And we often make it look like weary service. How do we undo that? And I really think sometimes giving up something can help. Saying to people, look, just stop. I don't know how the church will cope if you do stop that ministry. It's really important, but I know that Jesus can cope, and that this is his church. But even more than stopping, I think we need to grasp what Jesus is saying in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. He's speaking to the situation where James and John have asked for a reward for their service. They're more blatant than us. They say, well, we've been pretty good servants. We followed you around all this. Can we sit at your left and right in glory? We realize that you are the Lord of the cosmos, the ruler of the ages, the King of kings, the Lord of lords. We'd like to be number 2 and 3, please. Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Evidently, because Jesus sits at the right hand of the Father, so one of them is asking to be God the Father. But even more, he says, can you be baptized with the cup? I'll be baptized. Yes. Easy, doddle, no problem. They don't understand what they're asking. And the other 10 are annoyed, not because they're upset and grieved by the sin of James and John, but because they wish they'd got their request in first. Peter's thinking, hey, I'm number 1. I'm the rock. And the others are annoyed because they wanted to be 2. And Jesus says, look, this is the way the Gentiles work. They use their service to get things for themselves. Not so with you. But then he says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. It might be that you're here this morning, you're not a Christian, and you're thinking, well, all this talk about serving in the church, this is something I'm interested in, it's kind of interesting. If that's you, if you're here because you want to find out, because something about Jesus has grabbed your attention, or something about the love of Christ you've seen in this church has grabbed your attention, then listen up. Doesn't mean switch off if you're a Christian, but this bit, I think, is the heart of who Jesus is. And it is extraordinary, because we would not imagine a God like this. The other religions of the world that imagine God, they do not imagine God like this. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is talking about himself. The Son of Man is a title he uses for himself. It talks about a human figure. It's a reference to the Old Testament book of Daniel, where Daniel prophesies that one day the Son of Man will come, and he will stand before the Ancient of Days, and he'll be given all authority and rule and power. God Almighty, the Ancient of Days, will give this human God figure, this Son of Man, all eternal rule and authority. This is a picture of the Messiah, the promised King, in the most powerful and glorious way imaginable. Jesus saying, I am the God-man. I am the promised King of the ages. I am the Lord of nations. I am the one whose rule will stretch day after day after day into all eternity, and mile after mile after mile over the whole cosmos. And I came not to be served. He could command the service of 10,000 angels like that. He could compel the service of humanity. I came not to be served. It is absolutely extraordinary that the great King of heaven came not to be served, but to serve. I came to serve you. I came to make myself your slave. The relationship between God and his people is servant and served, and it is the other way round to what we would expect. If you've come here because you're thinking, I quite like Jesus, I'd like to understand the cost of serving him. He seems like a good God. I want to weigh it up. I'm interested in him, but I want to know what he's like. There is no cost. Jesus gives himself to us freely. And that doesn't change. That's not just about what he did on the cross, and I'll come to that in a moment. It is who he is. It is deeper than what he does. What he does flows out of who he is. He is the suffering servant. And that is most clearly seen on the cross. Because Jesus died not as a martyr, not as an example, not simply to show his love, but he died to to take away all our wickedness, all our sin. As Christ hung on the cross, he took into his body our hatred of God, our indifference to God, our turning our back on God, our rebellion against the rule of God. He took it into his body and he suffered the punishment we deserve. He went through our hell and he died our death in our place. When we stand before God, he doesn't see us as we are. Instead, Jesus takes our sin and gives us his goodness, his righteousness. It's a bit like Cinderella. Don't imagine that it's the morning after the wedding, and Prince Charming wakes up in his charming bed, adjusts his charming hair, and oh, where's Cinderella? And he looks, and there she is, she's scrubbing the floor. And he says, Cinderella, what are you doing? And she looks up, charming, but not too bright. I'm scrubbing the floor, dear. Can't you see? She said, but why are you doing that? Well, I have to do it. It's my job. I have. No, you're a princess. You don't have to. We have people to do that. But I feel like I'll send someone else. You're now mine. You aren't a servant. You have the kingdom. I take away your filth, your rags, your dirt. I take away your debts. And I give you all that I am. You see, the nature of Christ's service of us is that he takes us as his bride. The Bible talks about the church as his bride. And that means that we are one with him. I used to think that the way the gospel worked, I taught this, was Bruce Almighty. I don't know if you've seen that film. There's a bit in it where God is talking to Bruce, and he shows him his filing cabinet, God's filing cabinet. And in it, there's a file of Bruce's righteous deeds. And he gives it to him, and Bruce opens this file, and he's thumbing through it. He thinks, oh, this is quite good. Oh, yeah, I did do that. Oh, look at me, aren't I? And he's enjoying himself. And then God says, shall I show you the file of your sin? And Bruce kind of rather reluctantly agrees. And God opens a drawer, and the drawer shoots out about a mile. And it's just full. And I used to think that what Christ did on the cross was take away that drawer of my sin and burn it. Amen. So that all I had left was the file of my righteousness. That although thin, meant that I was righteous. Because zero sin and a thin file of righteousness equals righteous. That isn't the gospel. Jesus takes away my sin and gives me his righteousness. So that when I stand before God, I don't stand there with the righteous deeds of John. I stand there in the perfectly spotless, beautifully clean righteousness of Jesus Christ. When God looks at us, he sees the goodness, the integrity, the honesty, the compassion, the love, the warmth, the kindness of Jesus, his Son. Which is incredible. God so loved you that he chose to die to make you as holy, as righteous, as good as he is. And when you think about it, what does that do to your service? Well, if I can serve God better than Jesus, then there's a place for me to be excited about my service of God. If I can establish for myself a better righteousness than the righteousness of Christ, if I can make myself more honest, more good, more kind, more loving, more gentle than Jesus, then maybe there's room for me to be obsessed with my service. But if I can't make myself more righteous than the righteous one, then it doesn't matter. And and it becomes something different. And this is a thought I just want to leave you with. But let me just read from Revelation 19. Revelation is the last book of the Bible. It talks about where we're heading. Revelation chapter 19, verse 6. Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, crying out, Hallelujah, for the Lord our God, the Almighty, reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. We are heading towards a wedding. Jesus will come back and marry his bride. And now, as a bloke, getting ready for the wedding involved eating sausages, bacon and things like that. It involved playing a bit of messing about with my brother and my ushers. And then at the last minute, my brother, who's my best man, said, I think we ought to put our suits on. So we went into the bedroom and we quickly chucked on these rather stiff suits. And well, this is not a tie, this is a bit of cloth. I don't know how it does. Mum. And you kind of go out. I understand that for ladies, getting ready for your wedding, you often spend more than 5 minutes putting your clothes on and doing your hair. I spend a whole 5. It's often a bit more of a deal. Often you go and choose the dress, I imagine, with some care. It's not just a question of going to Moss Bros and picking the same charcoal grey suit that everyone else wears. It's a more careful affair. And for many, it is a deeply enjoyable thing to put on your wedding dress. Fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Our righteous deeds are Christ's way of giving us a beautiful dress. They are not our gift to him, they are his gift to us. Because he knows we will enjoy living out the righteousness he gives us. He knows that there is no more beautiful and blessed way of life than the way of life he lived. He wants us to be happy, and happiness lies in obedience. He wants us to be filled with joy, and it was for the joy set before him that Christ endured the cross. His joy sprang from his love of the Father, his love of the bride, and his obedience to God his Father. He doesn't want us to serve him because he needs our service. He wants us to serve him because he knows how good it is to serve a good master. He knows what it's like to serve the Father. And there's more we could push into here. We are sons of God. We are children of God the Father. I want to just finish, though, with Song of Songs, chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Song of Songs is the wedding, it's a romance between Solomon and his bride, the Shulamite. It's a picture of Christ's relationship with the church. And Song of Songs, chapter 4, is the speech or the song of the groom on his wedding day. So this is what Christ says to us, the church. Song of Songs, chapter 4, verse 9. So Jesus says to us, "You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice." Jesus finds our love for him beautiful. He was not reluctant to die for us. He wasn't pushed into it, forced by his Father. He finds our love for him beautiful. We only love him because he first loved us, and yet he still finds us delightful. He looks at us now, sitting here, as a groom turns when he hears the wedding music start and sees his bride walking up from behind. When Jesus looks at us, he feels that. He loves us. And if we can keep the picture in our mind of who Christ is, what he has done, that he came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many, it is impossible to serve him wrongly. If you're married to a good husband who treats you well and who gives himself sacrificially in love for you, then your humility, your love, your submission to him, the work you do for him feels like a joy. So it is with Christ. He gives us a beautiful dress to put on, fine linen, white and pure. He gives us works of service to do so that we can enjoy him more. If there are burdens, stop them. But whatever, fix your eyes on Christ as the servant. Just remember the name of your church. I think it's brilliant. And you will enjoy him. If he is your servant, you can't serve him wrong.